Our Earth is surrounded by something which sets it apart from almost all other heavenly bodies, an atmosphere, which is what makes life possible in the first place. Yet, more than 30,000 years ago, man begins to change the composition of this atmosphere. The use of fire is a milestone in this development. By harnessing fire, we open new sources of nutrition and were able to settle the cold regions of our planet. We have, however, unleashed too much fire. The internal combustion engines of more than 1 billion automobiles. Heating, propulsion units for transport, power stations, they all create CO2, carbon dioxide. In view of the immense changes we have brought about on our planet, scientists today speak of the Anthropocene, the age of man.
The term Anthropocene is a good term. It says we now live in a world that's dominated by human activities, that we humans are changing our environment.
In the 1960s, for the first time in history, spaceflight provides mankind with a global view of its home.
Seeing the Earth as a whole has often been described as this feeling known as the overview effect. What the astronauts really discovered was this new perspective, this new way of seeing our planet as a whole, and that was the main discovery of that mission.
Iceland, in the extreme north of Europe. In the summer of 2019, the first glacier here is declared dead. Within just 130 years, it lost 35 meters of ice cover, a fate which awaits many other glaciers in the decades to come. Since Iceland is not an isolated case. The immense ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, which hold a major part of our planet's fresh water, are losing 125 billion tons of their mass each year, a gigantic amount. At the Goddard Space Flight Center in Washington, D.C., NASA scientists are monitoring the glaciers closely. They can tell exactly where the mountains of ice are most affected.
What we see here are these bubbles popping up as we move across the globe. And these bubbles are indicating each individual glacier from the Himalaya through Alaska, and then we're going to move to South America. And underlying these glaciers, we're going to show a map here. In these particular regions, we're getting a lot of blue, and that blue color is indicating that these glaciers are melting and they're losing mass over time. And as we move to Alaska, we'll see an even darker purple, and that purple is really indicating a strong amount of mass loss.
Glaciers are like thermometers that indicate the health of the world's climate. Since 1850, they've been steadily receding. On Iceland alone, 28 out of 34 glaciers have shrunk by somewhere in the region of several kilometers. Some people believe that this is due to natural causes, such as volcanic activity, which is widespread on Iceland. The 3 New Kugigor volcano, which has been dormant for 4,000 years, provides a unique glimpse into a magma chamber 120 meters deep. However, despite the impressive dimensions of volcanoes, their contribution to worldwide CO2 emissions is comparatively small. Studies indicate that they are responsible for merely 1% of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. However, there is more CO2 in our air today than during the past 3 million years. When shortwave radiation from the sun hits Earth, it's partially transformed into heat, which is reflected as long-wave infrared radiation. Yet this long-wave radiation cannot pass through CO2, so some of this heat is thrown back onto Earth, causing the so-called greenhouse effect.
When you look at the rates of change that we're seeing now in the Anthropocene, they're at least as fast as those we saw when the dinosaurs went extinct, or they're probably even faster than that. So this, if you like, is like a human-driven meteorite strike hitting the Earth. It's an extremely rapid change in the fundamental planetary environment that overwhelms the capacity of the biosphere to adapt or evolve.
There are causes for the changes in our air which aren't obvious at first sight, such as intensive agriculture. More than 5,000 years ago, the Chinese began to cultivate rice and reshape their environment by creating terraced rice fields. Rice is one of the 4 most important agricultural crops in the world. To this day, China is the biggest producer. But rice is also the daily bread of people in other parts of Southeast Asia. It's the main source of nutrition to half the population of the planet. Under ideal conditions, such as a hot, humid, tropical climate, 3 harvests a year are possible. Yet in wet rice cultivation, between 3,000 and 5,000 litres of flowing water are required for each kilogram of rice. And what's more, the method produces gases. Permanent flooding of the soil creates an environment almost free of oxygen, feeding anaerobic single-cell organisms, which in turn create methane. The increase of this gas, which started 6,000 years ago with the cultivation of rice, is still verifiable in today's atmosphere. It's believed that wet rice cultivation is responsible for 17% of all methane in our atmosphere. Next to CO2, methane is the most important anthropogenic or man-made greenhouse gas. Its effect on global warming is 25 times greater than that of CO2. The changes man has inflicted upon Earth have become more than obvious elsewhere too. Since ancient times, the search for copper, lead, gold and silver has prompted us to demolish entire mountains, like here at the Rio Tinto in Spain. Metal extraction has been so important for human civilization that we name entire periods of history on that basis, the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, for example. And by mining these raw materials, man also gradually begins to change the air. The scars left by mining for ore extend over several kilometers along the Rio Tinto. The miners dig ever deeper into Earth. Millions of tons of waste and slag pile up, forming gigantic heaps, evidence of an exploitation that has been going on for centuries. What's no longer needed is simply left to decay. Such as the remains of ovens, which were used to smelt copper ore. It poisoned the rivers and the air to such an extent that there were violent protests in 1888, during which over 100 people lost their lives. Environmental pollution isn't a phenomenon of the industrial age. Far from it. Even in ancient times, people turned whole forests into fuel for melting iron.
The Rio Tinto, the Red River, in southern Spain, transports large quantities of iron. It can be found in the upper reaches of the river, as was already known to the ancient Romans. They mined iron and copper here, causing huge changes to the environment.
Und dabei die Umwelt ganz stark verändert.
Yet the Romans didn't just mine on a large scale. 2,000 years ago, another industry was booming in Rome: the production of glass. It requires huge quantities of firewood, causing gravoris celi, Latin for an overcast sky, which constantly shrouds the city, until the emperor expels the glass blowers from the capital. By then, however, the forests around Rome have been largely chopped down. Yet nature has produced a fuel that's much more effective than wood: coal. Coal is created when organic material decomposes at the bottom of lakes or swamps in the absence of air. Geological processes push the material downwards, and over millions of years, it becomes covered by layers of earth or marine sediment. This way, trees and plants are gradually compressed to form coal. It's mined first in England, and soon afterwards in Germany too. Extracting coal may be hard work, but it's highly lucrative. Coal burns and heats far better than wood. This is particularly apparent in the process of smelting metal. Tens of thousands of people earn a living from mining, albeit initially using rather simple methods. Gradually, the original process of surface coal extraction gives way to proper mining, since generally the deeper the seam, the better the coal.
Für die Verhüttung zum Beispiel von Erzen.
To smelt ore, which is usually won by mining, you need extremely high temperatures, which can only be achieved by burning coal, which has to be mined too. That is why coal mining, which started in the 12th and 13th centuries, until it was carried out on a grand scale at the end of the 18th century, is of immeasurable importance for the development of the Anthropocene. That's when the world started to change in earnest.
Damit hat sich die Welt erst richtig verändert.
Brown coal is almost exclusively extracted in open-cast mines. The work is performed by some of the biggest machines in the world. 90% of brown coal is used in power stations to create electricity. The world over, we extract approximately 8 million tons of coal and lignite each year. These resources will last for several centuries to come, but the effect on our climate is gigantic. When carbon dioxide is released, it can change the world dramatically, as history has shown. In 1870, London is the biggest city in the world. 3.5 million fires from factories and private houses pollute the atmosphere. Yet these fires don't merely deprive people of the air they need to breathe, they also create horrific workplaces.
We've come to sweep your chimney, sir.
In you come.
Especially for children. The chimneys must be cleaned of soot, which may start burning and cause dangerous fires in the chimneys. As the chimneys are too small for adults, they're cleaned by young lads, known as chimney boys.
Get in there and up you go.
Usually, they're orphans or children who've been sold by their parents. They use the most primitive methods to remove the dirt and the soot. The soot then can even be sold as a dye. However, many of the children suffer serious health problems and die at an early age. The exploitation of the chimney boys is finally outlawed at the end of the 19th century. But coal fires continue to smother London in smog for decades to come. In December 1952, Exhaust gases from heating and automobiles combine with fog to form a deadly cloud. A catastrophic situation which causes at least 4,000 deaths. Today, coal heating has been banned in many major cities like London. But coal is still one of the main sources of energy for mankind. 12,600 coal-fired power stations are in operation across the world, with 8 billion tons of coal mined each year, predominantly in China, followed by India and the United States. In Europe, Germany is the prime consumer. Today, coal-fired power stations produce about 40% of the world's electricity needs. The greenhouse gases produced this way are among the main causes of global warming.
The scale of the problem is the hardest thing for people to grasp. At the moment, we're putting 50 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. Now, what would it take to get just 1/10 of that out, say 5 gigatons, out of the atmosphere? To do that, we'd have to plant the lower 48 states of the USA in forest, the whole thing, and have it growing vigorously for a century to get on average around 5 gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere by planting trees. So you can see the scalability problem. It is immense.
This is one reason why a pilot project has been launched in Iceland, aimed at extracting CO2 from the air. Under certain conditions, CO2 can produce a mineral, carbonate. However, as a natural process, this takes thousands of years. An experimental procedure has succeeded in filtering 250 tons of CO2 out of the air. It's then captured in water and injected at high pressure into the subsurface. Edda Sif Aradottir heads the International Carbfix Research Project, which uses innovative technology to reduce the proportion of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
These rocks, called basalts, they contain high amount of calcium, magnesium and iron, and when water, which we capture CO2 in, comes into contact with this rock formation, it actually dissolves, releasing the calcium, magnesium and iron into the water phase, where these chemicals can meet up with the dissolved CO2 and a new mineral is formed called carbonate.
The Carbfix project is linked to a geothermal power plant, since the energy-intensive process to transform greenhouse gases only makes sense ecologically if it employs clean energy, which is available at a reasonable cost here.
Certainly the storage capacity is available on a global scale, and if we only have a look at the cost of our operations here, currently we're able to capture, inject and monitor the CO2 here at the same cost as the price of carbon quota is being traded at on the ETS market today.
Today, industrial corporations can buy the right to emit certain quantities of CO2. Yet, when measured against the consequences, this price is far too low.
In this world, money is what speaks, and we need to make the polluters pay for the damage they're doing. We know that we can extract carbon out of the atmosphere for a cost of about $100 a tonne, and we know that in 10 to 20 years we'll be doing our utmost to do that, and we'll be paying that cost. So how is it that today we can let people put that pollution into the atmosphere for free?
There are other strategies to improve the state of the atmosphere, which do not resort to high-tech procedures, but to plants. In China, deserts are expanding, as forests have been cut down at a reckless rate over decades. All that ended in 1978 and was replaced by an unprecedented reforestation program. So far, no less than 60 billion trees have been planted. The first step is for brushwood to be placed in the sand to form windbreaks, to keep the young trees and saplings from being buried in sand. The aim is to recreate a forest as big as Germany by the year 2050, forming a green wall to hold back the Gobi Desert. The Great Green Wall of China not only keeps the quicksand in place, it also provides better air. Cities like Milan have adopted green architecture like the Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest, which spreads all over a house, as plants literally give us the air we need to breathe. It's a discovery established back in the 17th century by an Englishman named Joseph Priestley. The theologian and natural scientist is experimenting to find out how objects and living beings behave in the absence of air. He discovers that without air, candles would extinguish after a short time and animals would perish. But if plants are introduced into this closed system, the animals survive. Priestley concludes that plants compensate for the consumption of oxygen. He had stumbled upon the fundamental principle of the oxygen cycle, which is what makes life on Earth possible in the first place. In a complicated process, plants, with the help of light, water, and carbon dioxide, produce glucose, which releases oxygen into the air. This is known as photosynthesis. Increased concentrations of carbon dioxide in the air promote plant growth, an effect that can be observed the world over. And that's why the biomass has increased over recent decades in spite of large-scale clearings. Earth has become greener. This effect of the greenhouse can also be put to use in industrialized agriculture. In the Netherlands, they've come up with some special concepts to that end. Here, greenhouses cover an area of around 5,000 hectares. Their yields are as much as 10 times higher than those from field cultivation. At this sweet pepper plantation, they use CO2 emissions from nearby industrial plants to accelerate the growth of the plants.
All along these hoses, there are tiny holes through which the CO2 may pass out. It then slowly rises among the plants, so they have ample time to absorb it.
However, relying on plants alone will hardly reduce global CO2 emissions. That's why scientists at universities all over the world, like here at the University of California, are developing future-oriented technologies, such as artificial photosynthesis. Their aim is to imitate the process by which plants chemically transform CO2. In other words, to create a substance exploitable by man with the help of water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide.
What we're doing here is something that the plant is doing already, that is harvest the energy from the sun and store into a chemical bonds. The plant is doing it by making sugars by itself. So what we're doing is taking the energy from the sun and try to create green fuels. In that sense, that when you burn the fuels, you're not really contributing any CO2 emission.
The end product is methane, which can be used for heating or alcohol. Technologies for what's called carbon capture will play an important part in coping with the amount of CO2 emissions caused by man. In the summer of 2019, more than 70,000 fires are burning in the Amazon basin. Within just a few days, an area as large as 600,000 football pitches is destroyed. Most of these fires are intentionally started with a view to obtaining new space for fields. Fields which are not intended to provide food for people, but for livestock.
If
we burn down forests on a large scale, this not only increases the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, we also destroy the reservoirs where carbon dioxide can be stored. By practicing deforestation, we influence the climate, and many of our other activities also have an effect both on the biosphere and the geosphere.
Though its effect is underestimated, large-scale livestock farming is one of the biggest causes of greenhouse gases. Like here in Australia, in the middle of the arid outback. At present, approximately 1.5 billion cattle are kept the world over, with devastating consequences for the soil and the air. The herds number not just some 100 cattle, but tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of animals. With grazing areas that huge, the men on the ground need support from the air. Megafarms like this satisfy the worldwide hunger for beef. Admittedly, the cattle here are generally better off than those reared in stalls. But their digestive tracts too emit methane, a gas which has a far larger impact on the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. A single cow produces approximately as much greenhouse gas in 1 year than a car driven 18,000 kilometers. Worldwide consumption of meat has increased sixfold from 1950 to 2019, and methane emissions increased with it.
The less meat we consume, the less we contribute to climate change, the less gases are emitted into the atmosphere, and the less land has to be cleared for forage production.
In the United States, approximately 120 kilograms of meat are consumed by each person each year. Next in line are South Americans, Europeans, and Chinese. Meat consumption is lowest in Africa. But even in the USA, a change in attitudes is taking place, especially with young people. In New York, more and more restaurants offer alternatives to meat. In the home of the burger, vegetarian meatballs have become all the rage.
I think we've gone slightly off the direction that we should be going in terms of food. I think that we've done things on an industrial scale because that was easier and cheaper, but not necessarily better for the environment.
What Brad Farmery processes in his kitchen is the result of many years of research. It may look like ground beef, but it is in fact a blend of pure plant products. Their taste and texture are intended to resemble that of meat as closely as possible. After all, these burgers are not meant to convince vegetarians, but meat lovers.
In New York, we're lucky because we have people that are willing to spend more on food, and I think getting behind a product like the Impossible Burger takes that. It takes some money, it takes some ingenuity, but also takes people who enjoy good taste.
And to many people, good taste means the taste of meat. The more a vegetarian burger appeals to them, the closer it feels like meat when they chew it. So the more popular it is with customers. Between 2018 and 2019, sales of vegetarian burgers in the United States increased by an incredible 268%.
To be a part of this and to know that we are able to change the world and change the future, it's something very special.
Today, 15% of greenhouse gases originate from large-scale livestock farming. But the number one climate killer has always been fossil fuels. Each year, over 4 billion tons of crude oil are being produced worldwide. The black gold is literally the fuel of the Anthropocene. Its inexorable rise begins in the mid-19th century.
Now then,
when American chemist Benjamin Silliman succeeds for the first time in distilling a substance from crude oil that offers undreamt of opportunities: petroleum. In fact, mineral oil is nothing new.
Try this.
Native American Indians from the Seneca tribe traded oil that oozed out of the ground naturally.
Excellent.
While European settlers used it predominantly as ointment or grease. Silliman's discovery attracts investors.
Gentlemen, I'm honored to see you here.
A New York lawyer has heard that petroleum can be used in lamps.
This will be one of your greatest opportunities ever.
He senses a good business, since up until then, lamps were fueled by whale oil.
If you invest now.
A commodity that's becoming scarce.
Stay, white man.
The newly founded Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company commissions an adventurous character called Edwin Drake.
What's that?
To track down Indian sources of oil and exploit them wherever possible.
Try it.
No one could possibly imagine the process this sets in motion.
All right. Where's it from?
Follow the way.
The native Indian directs Drake to Titusville in North Pennsylvania. At that time, nobody knows exactly how to extract large quantities of mineral oil. The Indians collect it on the surface, as small quantities occasionally seep out of the ground. Drake aims to get at the source, so he starts digging. It's hard labor. In the end, he does find oil, but the amount obtained is low. Drake realizes that he must dig deeper. The only technical solution to this is a drilling tower, which allows a steel pipe to be pushed into the ground.
Attention!
Break! Break!
On August 27, 1859, he finds considerable reserves of oil at a depth of 21 meters, supplying 1,500 liters of crude a day. Oil fever has arrived. Demand for the new fuel, which is rich in energy and comparatively cheap, remains unabated today. But oil harms the environment not only when fuel oil is burned, but also during the production of gasoline or diesel. Most of our machines are powered by oil. The automobile, above all, is responsible for what is known as the Great Acceleration, the ever-increasing transformation of the world.
One of the key developments we see, of course, is the emission of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere as the most important gas that is warming the climate. And that, for much of the preceding 10,000 years, was around 280 parts per million, which is a unit we use to measure it. And by mid-20th century, it had only crept up to about 300 or 310. But after 1950, it's gone from 310 or so all the way up to about 405. So that's a key parameter that was slowly changing and then went up.
By the year 2009, there are over 1 billion automobiles on the roads. By 2025, that figure will rise to 2 billion. The vast majority are private cars. The United States has always been the #1 automobile country. It's partly due to an invention which makes engines run more smoothly. Tetraethyl lead, or TEL.
Welcome to my presentation.
However, when the substance was introduced in 1923, there were negative headlines, as several people had died of lead poisoning during its development. Chemical engineer Thomas Midgley practices damage limitation with an impressive PR stunt.
That it is perfectly harmless.
On October 30th, 1924, he performs a demonstration in front of journalists to prove that leaded petrol is harmless.
By the name of tetraethyl.
Well, I truly didn't expect that.
Midgley tells the press that even daily contact with TEL is completely safe.
And my hands, as you see, stay absolutely clean and pure. Any more questions?
Professor, how can you prove that this substance isn't poisonous?
For today, you've seen enough.
It will be more than 50 years before a ban on the poisonous substance is initiated. Even before the Second World War, the automobile becomes an integral part of industrial societies and big business. In the US, the powerful bosses of car companies hatch a plan to buy up public tramway systems all over the country and close them down, thereby deliberately destroying America's public transport system to prompt people to buy cars. Their plan has repercussions still felt in a city like Los Angeles today. There's virtually no public transport in a metropolis with a population of 4 million. Carbon dioxide emissions in the City of Angels are among the highest in the world. In 2017, the worldwide output of CO2 has reached an unprecedented scale. However, it varies considerably between individual countries and continents in terms of percentages. Due to its many coal-fired power stations, China is the major contributor. Our consumption of fossil fuels is a striking illustration of what Anthropocene means. We're transforming geological time into human time. In other words, within a few decades, we use up natural reserves that have been created over millions of years. So nature, which proceeds at a much slower rate, has no time to compensate. With the help of technology and science, we're changing the planet at breathtaking speed. A devastating acceleration, leaving nature to pay the price. That is, the Anthropocene. It's not only in terms of CO2 production that the automobile has become the driving force of the Anthropocene. Its exhaust gases also contain damaging elements like dust particles and nitrogen oxide. Thousands of tons of particles from automobile tires pollute water, soil, and air as well. We've long known that polluted air costs lives, especially in major cities. NASA scientists at the Goddard Space Flight Center know precisely where pollution is worst.
What we see here is air pollution across the globe, and we see the different sources of air pollution and how they're being transported across the globe. And in white, we see this is mostly man-made anthropogenic emissions that cause pollution, and we see a lot of that, especially here over in China. Air pollution is a truly global problem. It gets emitted locally, but then it can be transported across the ocean, and it can reach places far away from where it actually originated. We know that there are approximately 8 million deaths per year that is directly attributable to air pollution. That's 1 out of 9 deaths every year.
Extreme weather events, too, claim more and more victims. Researchers have established that cyclone formation, especially over the northern Atlantic, is increasing. One possible explanation is the heating of the ocean's surface caused by the changing climate. These storms have a truly devastating power, causing damage running up to billions of dollars. In the winter of 2019 to 2020, huge forest fires rage in Australia, bringing about the death, according to estimates of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, of more than 1 billion animals. The number of fires and the extent of devastation is linked to an unusually long dry period. In Australia too, it's no longer possible to dismiss the effect of climatic change. Even with our many technological achievements, we're virtually helpless against such gigantic natural disasters. And according to the prognoses of many experts, they will increase.
We have to decide what kind of Anthropocene we're going to participate in and have an impact on. And my ancestors and yours did, to a great extent, live at the mercy of nature. The weather was the chief impact on their life. The great irony is that our effect on nature is now to the degree that we determine the weather. But of course that means that we are now more subject, and in the future will be more subject to the weather and more subject to the vagaries of nature than our ancestors were.
Clean, cheap energy without negative side effects has always been a dream of mankind. And in the middle of the last century, it appeared to be within reach by harnessing nuclear energy. Nuclear fission has been used since 1954 to create electricity. The first reactor was built in Russia. Some nuclear plants, however, have gained notoriety.
At school, they told us that a matchbox-sized piece of uranium can produce as much energy as a trainload of coal. It was generally perceived as an intellectual, high-tech, trendy, elite occupation. I had the impression that it was an honorable and top-notch job to be a nuclear engineer.
On April 26, 1986, a series of fateful events occurs. A safety test is being performed at the nuclear power station. Human error and technical faults combine to create overheating. This leads to an explosion in reactor block 4. It's the MCA, the maximum credible accident, a nuclear disaster. Everyone within a radius of 37 kilometers is evacuated. 400,000 people must find new homes.
I guess the main outcome of Chernobyl for me is that it divided my life into before and after. It changed my life dramatically. Life is very fragile. It's very easy to destroy it all by pressing just one button. If behind that button there is a multitude of different man-made systems.
Accidents like Chernobyl and the more recent disaster at Fukushima in 2011 have led countries like Germany, Italy, Belgium and Switzerland to break with nuclear energy, aiming to close down all reactors within a foreseeable period of time.
Today we're at a crossroads when it comes to nuclear energy. Soon the first countries, including Germany, will have completely closed down their nuclear reactors. Other countries will follow that example, so that in a few decades there will be hardly any nuclear power stations left, because by then there will be sufficient regenerative energy available that can be stored efficiently.
In the year 2019, there are 444 active nuclear reactors across the world, more than half of them in the United States and in Europe. Their number is likely to decline in the long run, in China and Japan too. However, the aftermath of nuclear power will stay with us for a long time. The radioactive waste we produce so far has to be stored permanently somewhere. Until now, there have only been intermediate facilities. One of the first deep final repositories is in a former salt mine near the German city of Salzgitter. The idea is that low-level radioactive material for medicine, industry and research will be stored at a depth of 1,000 meters in specially constructed chambers. When they're filled up, probably around 2060, the hollow spaces will be sealed in order to isolate the material from the environment on a long-term basis. And we really are talking long-term here. It will be millions of years before some of the substances will be entirely safe. The initial enthusiasm about nuclear power as a supposedly clean and cheap source of energy did not take into account this huge burden. Yet similar experiences have been made many times in the past. In 1930, Thomas Midgley holds another press conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, please come in and take a seat. Well then, as you know,
the inventor of lead additive for gasoline is presenting a new gas to operate fridges, which is neither toxic nor flammable, unlike substances previously used.
I will now present a discovery to you.
It really looks as though Midgley has hit the jackpot. He survives the presentation unharmed. The gas doesn't burn. However, what seems a success for the scientist proves a disaster for mankind.
Thomas Midgley is insofern eine tragische Figur.
Thomas Midgley is a tragic figure in the history of the Anthropocene, insofar as he made two ingenious inventions at the beginning of the 20th century, which had an enormous impact on the Anthropocene, and thus on our environment. We all know about leaded fuel, yet it is CFC, the gas which is responsible for the ozone hole, and thereby had incredible consequences.
The substance Midgley had synthesized, chlorofluorocarbon, CFC for short, was hailed as an outstanding invention. Yet it destroys the ozone layer, which is crucial for life on our planet. The ozone layer stretches at a height of 15 to 25 kilometers above the surface of our planet, at the lower level of the stratosphere. Ozone absorbs ultraviolet light. So without the ozone layer, high quantities of this aggressive radiation would reach the Earth. In order to prevent the destruction of this natural parasol, in 1989 the industrialized nations prohibited the use of CFC gases. And since then, the ozone layer has regenerated itself. An example of scientists' warnings being taken seriously, leading to political initiatives which protect our planet and therefore ourselves.
We still have stratospheric ozone. The governments and the private sector should have listened earlier, but in a relative scheme, it has become, in my opinion, a reasonable success story of scientific evidence being used by governments and by the private sector to solve a global environmental issue.
The biggest sources of energy in our world are the wind and the sun. Solar energy can be transformed into electricity in two ways. For instance, in solar thermal power stations, which use the light of the sun to create steam that drives turbines. Then there is the photovoltaic technique, where solar cells transform the energy of light directly into electricity. The advantage of this method, it can also be used on a small scale, on the roofs of houses, for example. In simple mathematical terms, the wind and the sun can provide all the energy we need.
I'm convinced that a century from now, energy will effectively be free. And we'll be able to do things that we can only imagine today. Because the abundance of natural energy that's coming to this earth is enormous, more than we could ever utilise in terms of solar and wind and geothermal. They're basically limitless resources. So if we can build the technologies that tap into them inexpensively, we can change everything.
Alternatives are urgently needed. as the demand for electricity is increasing rapidly the world over. According to a report from 2015, the 27 largest cities consume almost 8% of the world's energy. Not least because of the internet. Every minute, 2.5 billion people are online. One study has calculated that if the internet were a country, it would be the 6th largest consumer of electricity in the world, and the demand is steadily increasing. As we make the transition into a sustainable society, we will have to cut back on our greed for energy.
There's a real clash between the pressure, the overriding pressure to consume more, to grow economies, all this growth ethic, and that's going to take us to disaster. There's no doubt about it. That's why we've got the Anthropocene.
Once a year, we're reminded of just how easily things could be changed. During Earth Hour, instigated by the Worldwide Fund for Nature, we turn off lights on famous buildings and structures for 1 hour. The electricity thus saved is sufficient to power 12 hospitals for a whole year.
We need policies to stimulate a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But we also need behaviour change. We need individuals, we need communities, we need governments and the private sector to recognise their current behaviour is inconsistent with a more sustainable world in the future. So technology will play a key role, but it's only one element of how we need to address these large global scale issues.
Our task is to build a future for a population that will soon reach 10 billion. We must devote all our efforts to this task and be prepared to re-examine the habits we've developed in our lifetimes. Because in the end, how we wish to live is up to us.